Emma Roberts was elbow deep in the scent of gun oil when the chime above the door rang, signaling a visitor. She looked up from a workbench where her late father's tools were still arranged exactly as he had left them. 3 years had passed since Robert's sudden death, and in that time she had carried the burden of running his shop with the same meticulous care he had always demanded. The afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows, painting long shadows across racks of rifles, boxes of ammunition, and stacks of old ballistics charts. Most customers wandered through her father's collection as if it were a grocery aisle. They would touch the polished wood, admire the weight of steel, and then ask careless questions that revealed how little they truly understood. This man was different, mid-30s perhaps, with squared shoulders and movements that carried the rhythm of practiced efficiency. He studied a vintage Springfield rifle from 1943 as if it were a sacred artifact. His gaze traced the barrel with reverence, and Emma recognized immediately that this was not a casual visitor. When the man finally approached her counter, Emma noticed the rifle case he carried with deliberate care. He laid it gently across the scarred wood, the way someone might place a family heirloom into the hands of a trusted friend. Emma unlatched the case, and her breath caught. It was a custom .338 Magnum, heavily modified, the barrel hand-lapped, the stock adjusted for absolute precision, and the mounted scope worth more than most cars. It was the kind of weapon that whispered stories before a single shot was fired. She glanced at the faded patch on his worn jacket. The eagle and trident were unmistakable, though she chose not to comment. He extended a hand, calloused and firm. "John," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "Former military, I heard this shop delivers the best precision work in 3 states." Emma wiped her palms against her apron and returned the handshake, feeling the solidity of his grip. "Emma Roberts," she replied, "though whoever told you that might be exaggerating." John's eyes wandered the shop, not in idle curiosity, but with the keen evaluation of a man who measured details. He noticed the way she had labeled every caliber of ammunition, the carefully tracked service records, the precision of her father's old instruments that she still used. He finally spoke again, his voice low but firm. "Professionalism is not about appearance. It is about precision, and I can see that you understand precision." Emma began her inspection of the rifle, following the process her father had drilled into her years ago. First, a full visual examination for signs of wear or misuse, then careful disassembly, each piece laid out in exact order across her mat. Robert had been uncompromising in his methods, insisting that every detail mattered. At the time, she had never understood why he demanded perfection for tools she herself had never intended to fire. Yet the habits had become second nature. John leaned against the counter, watching every motion. "You handle that rifle as if you have fired for decades," he observed. Emma gave a short laugh without mirth. "I have never fired a single shot in my life," she said, her hand steady as she lifted the bolt into the light. "My father planned to teach me, but he died before the lessons began." She left the rest unsaid, the accident, the abrupt end to promises never fulfilled. John studied her more closely now. "Never, not even once," he asked. "Safety," she replied, adjusting her magnifying lamp. "My father was insistent. Shooting was not a game. You either learned with respect or not at all. He was going to start my training this summer. I turned 17, but that spring the car accident changed everything." Silence filled the shop except for the quiet clink of tools. Emma had grown used to these silences. Customers often revealed more than they intended when entrusting her with weapons that carried memories, burdens, or scars. She could see that John's rifle was no ordinary tool. The careful wear on the stock, the immaculate maintenance, the deliberate customizations all spoke of history, experience, and attachment. "This is beautiful work," Emma murmured as she studied the trigger assembly. Whoever modified this knew the craft intimately. A trigger pull at this level must be flawlessly consistent. "You can tell all of that from a glance," John asked, his tone carrying surprise. "Every weapon tells its story," Emma replied. "Scratches were patterns. The way pieces fit together, they reveal more than words. My father taught me to read rifles the way others read books." She continued her inspection, noting the pristine condition of the barrel despite evidence of heavy use. This rifle has seen real action, but has been cared for by someone who respects what it can do. John's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. And what exactly do you think it can do? He asked. Emma hesitated, weighing her answer. The caliber, the barrel length, the optics, it is built for extreme long-range precision, she said carefully. In the right hands, perhaps 1,500 meters. What if the right hands could stretch it much further? John said softly. The tone in his voice carried something that made Emma look up from her work. His gaze was steady, piercing, carrying a challenge she had not expected. Her shop suddenly felt quieter, more isolated, as if the air itself was waiting for her response. I would say that depends entirely on the shooter, she answered, keeping her hands busy but her eyes alert. For the first time since walking in, John smiled. It was small, but it felt like a door had opened. Emma sensed she had just passed a test she had not known she was taking. 3 days later, John returned, but this time he carried no rifle. Instead, he held a manila folder under his arm, and the way he entered the shop made it clear this was no casual visit. Your rifle is ready. Emma called from the counter where she had been reorganizing her father's charts. Cleaned and calibrated, though it barely needed my work. Whoever maintains it knows their craft. That would be me, John replied, though he remained by the display case that held Robert's personal collection, rifles never meant for sale, each representing a piece of history. Tell me about your father, he said suddenly. Emma froze. Few customers had ever asked about Robert. Fewer still knew of his background. John turned from the case and spoke with quiet certainty. I did some research. Robert Roberts trained military snipers for over a decade before opening this shop. He was a national champion 3 times, and he developed a method for long-range ballistic calculation that changed the discipline. Emma's hands stilled, her throat tightening. Very few people knew this. You have done your homework, she admitted. John stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. I find it curious that a man who spent his life teaching others the art of precision never taught his own daughter to fire. The words struck deep. Emma had asked herself the same question countless times. He was protective, she said slowly. Shooting demanded maturity, responsibility. He was waiting until he thought I was ready. John opened the folder and laid a photograph on the counter. A desert landscape stretched across the frame, 2 small figures in the foreground, a distant target barely visible. Numbers in the margin told the story. 3,871 meters, 2.4 meters, confirmed kill. That is the world record for the longest confirmed sniper shot, John explained. Canadian Forces, 2017. The bullet was in flight for over 10 seconds before impact. Emma studied the photo, her mind racing with calculations, wind speed, bullet drop, atmospheric pressure, Earth's rotation. It was staggering. Such precision was beyond imagination. Why are you showing me this? She asked, unsettled. Because, John said quietly, I believe you could break that record. Emma stared at him, convinced she had misheard. I've been thinking since our first meeting, John continued. You possess technical knowledge, the way you approach problems, the intuitive precision of your methods. You have what most shooters never achieve, an instinct untouched by bad habits. Emma shook her head. John, I told you I have never fired a shot in my life. Exactly, he replied with certainty. And that is why I believe you can. The morning was pale with mist when Emma found herself driving toward the Riverside Range, a place she had passed countless times but never dared enter. The steering wheel felt slick in her palms, her heart beating faster with every mile. She had agreed to this against all reason, drawn less by ambition and more by something she could not yet name, a pull toward a challenge that had unsettled her since John first placed that photograph on her counter. When she arrived, John was already there. His truck was parked near the office, a long rifle case resting in its bed. He looked at her with a small, knowing smile as she stepped out, nervous energy radiating from her posture. Second thoughts, he asked. Third and fourth, Emma admitted, adjusting the strap of her bag. This is by far the most reckless thing I have agreed to. Good, John said with a quiet chuckle as he lifted the rifle case. Overconfidence kills more shooters than poor aim. He led her toward the 100-yard line where the morning fog was still hanging low, paper targets standing like pale sentinels in the stillness. The rifle he unveiled was not the imposing .338 Magnum she had inspected at the shop. Instead, it was a standard Remington 700 chambered in .308. Simple, unmodified, the sort of weapon thousands of hunters carried. Emma frowned at its ordinariness, but John explained. We start simple. This is about learning fundamentals, not glamour. Breathing, posture, trigger control. The weapon is just a tool. Emma hesitated as he handed it to her. She had cleaned dozens of these rifles, her hands intimately familiar with their weight, balance, and mechanics. But holding one with the intention of firing was different. The steel seemed heavier, the stock warmer against her shoulder. John's voice grew firmer as he shifted into the tone of an instructor. First rule, the weapon is always loaded, even when you know it is not. Second rule, never point it at anything you do not intend to destroy. Third, your finger stays off the trigger until you are ready. Remember these, because they are not optional. Emma nodded, her throat dry. She lay prone on the mat, watching as John adjusted the bipod and showed her how to align her body with the scope. Forget everything you have seen in movies, he told her. This is not about power or aggression. It is about stillness. Calm. Breathe normally. Let your heartbeat settle. Take in a breath, release half of it, then hold. Through the scope, the paper target loomed at what seemed both close and impossibly distant. The crosshairs wavered slightly with each beat of her heart, a phenomenon she had read about in her father's manuals but never experienced. Her pulse echoed in her ears. Now, John said softly, squeeze the trigger straight back. No jerking, no anticipation. Let the pressure build until the rifle fires. Emma obeyed. The rifle cracked with a thunderous sound that startled her despite her preparation, recoil nudging her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Through the scope, she saw a small hole appear in the white paper, several inches left of the bullseye. Not bad, John murmured, checking through his binoculars. Most beginners miss the target altogether on their first attempt. Emma frowned, already analyzing. Low and left, she muttered. Either I pulled wrong, or the scope alignment is off. What makes you think it is the scope? John asked curiously. Because my hold felt correct, she answered, adjusting her position. The pull was smooth, but I noticed the crosshairs drifted slightly off-center before the shot. John studied her with interest as she resettled. May I try again? Emma asked. By all means, he replied. Her second shot cut closer to the center. The third was closer still. By her fifth attempt, she was striking consistently inside the inner rings. John fell into silence, his binoculars fixed on her grouping. By the 10th shot, the holes overlapped, a tight cluster that would have impressed seasoned marksmen. This is impossible, he muttered. Nobody shoots like this their first time. But Emma was lost in mathematics, the interplay between wind, bullet drop, breathing rhythm, and stability. She found herself instinctively adjusting for variables she had only known in theory. Every shot was data, every impact a lesson. Her father's meticulous lectures and the countless hours studying manuals now bloomed into living practice. Can we try farther? She asked, surprising even herself. John lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression a mix of disbelief and awe. Emma, most new shooters struggle to even group at 100 yards, yet you are asking for more. He walked down range to inspect the paper, returning with a new target. His tone carried both gravity and anticipation. Let us see how you fare at 200. The longer distance should have been more difficult, but Emma felt strangely at ease. She studied the wind flags, calculated bullet drop, and accounted for the slight shift in air temperature as the morning warmed. When she finally pressed the trigger, the round landed dead center. Beginner's luck, she said with a nervous laugh, though her voice carried a spark of excitement. John shook his head slowly. Emma, I have trained soldiers for years, and few of them have made that shot on their first attempt. What you did is not luck. By the end of that session, Emma was consistently striking targets at 300 yards. Other shooters had stopped their own practice to watch, murmuring in disbelief. Her groupings were so tight that a coin could cover them. As the range emptied, John finally asked the question that had lingered in his eyes all morning. "How did that feel?" he said. Not the noise or the recoil, but the process itself, the adjustments, the calculations, the way it all came together. Emma considered. The honest answer rose within her like a memory she had been waiting to claim. "It felt like coming home," she admitted, "like a language I had always known but never spoken." John nodded slowly, as if confirming his suspicion. "Emma, what you just did does not happen. There is talent, and then there is what you showed me. You were born for this." That night, Emma lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling while numbers and formulas danced behind her eyes. She had dreamed of ballistics before, abstract and sterile, but now those dreams carried weight. The memory of recoil, the vibration of steel, the satisfaction of a perfect shot. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt tethered to something larger than the quiet shop, something alive. Tomorrow, John had promised, they would try farther still. 2 months passed, and Emma's life transformed so completely that the tidy rhythm of her father's shop was nearly forgotten. The counters once polished and orderly now gathered dust. Boxes of ammunition stacked in corners, neglected rifles waiting for service, and an appointment book filled with cancellations reflected how far she had drifted from routine. None of it mattered to her anymore. Every free hour was consumed by practice at the range, by scribbled formulas on weather charts, and by long nights of restless calculations. John had begun with gentle structure, 2 sessions a week, then 3. But soon they were at the range nearly every day, pushing the limits of distance with each attempt. At first, Emma worked at 300 yards, then 5, then 8. By the end of the first month, she was striking targets at 1,000 yards with groupings that left other shooters silent in awe. "This is becoming absurd," John muttered one afternoon as he studied her latest target through his high-powered binoculars. At 1,200 yards, she had placed 5 shots inside a circle no larger than a dinner plate. "I have been shooting for 2 decades, and I could not do that consistently." Emma barely heard him. She was already calculating the next distance, 1,500 yards, a range where even the Earth's rotation began to tug at the bullet's path. She scribbled in her notebook, recording temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and the direction of faint gusts that teased the flags along the field. Her handwriting grew hurried, as if the formulas were spilling out faster than her pen could keep up. "The humidity is dropping," she said without looking up, "and that increases air density at this elevation. It will reduce bullet drop, but may increase lateral drift if the pressure differential creates thermal currents." John watched her, both impressed and uneasy. The woman who had trembled at her first shot was now speaking in the language of physics, her focus as sharp as the rifle scope she peered through. It was brilliance, but it was also obsession, and he recognized the dangerous edge it carried. "Emma, when was the last time you took a day off?" he asked quietly. "A day off from what?" she replied, adjusting the scope without pause. "This is not work, John. This is what I was meant to do." Her conviction left no room for argument. The breakthrough came on a morning when no sane shooter would have set foot on a range. A storm system rolled through the valley, bringing gusts of 20 miles per hour and rain that came in erratic sheets. The flags whipped violently, visibility shifting between clear moments and heavy curtains of water. John shook his head as he stepped from the truck, staring at the wild scene. "This is madness," he said. "We cannot shoot in this weather." Emma was already unpacking her rifle. "Actually, this is perfect," she said with calm certainty. "Anyone can fire in stable conditions. Real mastery is born in chaos." She lay prone, the rain pattering against her jacket, her hair clinging damp against her face. For nearly an hour, she did not fire a single shot. Instead, she watched the wind, timing its cycles, noticing that even storms carried patterns. Gusts rose and fell in rhythm. Eddies formed in predictable spirals. Calm windows appeared like brief openings in a locked door. John grew restless, shaking his head at the insanity of it. When she finally squeezed the trigger, He expected the bullet to vanish into the storm's fury. Instead, 3 seconds later, the steel target rang like a bell across the valley. "How?" he whispered. Emma was already chambering another round, her movements fluid and sure. "Chaos is not random," she said simply. "It is only complex. You must think in 3 dimensions, account for vertical currents as well as horizontal." Her second shot struck inches from the first. The third landed closer still. John lowered his binoculars, unable to speak. He had seen extraordinary shooting before, but this was something else. It bordered on the impossible, as if Emma had reached beyond calculation into instinct, blending science with an intuitive feel that could not be taught. That night, she did not return home. She stayed at the range under the glare of floodlights, firing long after the rain had passed, her charts spread across the bench, her energy drinks lined like soldiers at attention. When John arrived at dawn, he found her asleep in the cab of her truck, pages of ballistic equations scattered across the dashboard, her rifle still resting on the shooting mat. "Emma, this has to stop," he said gently, handing her a steaming cup of coffee. "You're burning yourself out." She stirred, eyes red from exhaustion, hair tangled. "What time is it?" she asked groggily. 7 in the morning, John replied. "You have been here for 14 hours. Emma glanced at the papers around her, at the evidence of her obsession. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in her expression. Then she whispered, "I cannot stop. The mathematics, the physics, the puzzle of it all, it will not leave me. Every shot feels like one step closer to an answer." John sighed, recognizing the truth in her words. He had seen obsession before in his military years. But this was different. Emma's drive was not about ego or proving herself. It was about uncovering something deeper, an instinct that demanded expression. "What's the farthest shot you believe you can make?" he asked carefully. Emma looked out across the valley, her gaze fixed on the horizon where distant targets shimmered in the morning haze. "I do not know," she said softly, "but I think we are about to find out." The question of distance lingered between them like an unspoken challenge. Weeks passed, and each day Emma and John pushed farther. Targets at 1,500 yards fell with near-routine precision. At 1,800, she struck steel through swirling gusts, as if guided by instinct. By 2,000, she had reached territory few shooters even dared attempt. Her notebook grew dense with calculations, her mind alive with the interplay of physics, wind, and intuition. One afternoon, John steered his truck off the familiar highway onto a dirt road that wound through hills toward a remote facility. The place carried an air of secrecy, guarded gates opening only after John exchanged a few words with the watchman. Inside stretched a private testing range that seemed to go on forever, ridges rising and falling like waves of stone. "This is where contractors test equipment," John explained as they drove deeper. "Distances here exceed anything available to civilians." A tall man in his 60s greeted them near the range office. His posture was still military sharp, his presence commanding. "Michael," John said, introducing him, "a retired colonel, range master here. He has agreed to give us access." Michael's eyes studied Emma with frank skepticism. "John speaks highly of you," he said, "but this place is not for games. Our longest target is set at 3,500 yards. That is over 2 miles. We use it for equipment trials, not actual shooting. The variables at that distance are beyond calculation." Emma felt the familiar surge of nervous energy, half fear, half excitement. "May I try?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. Michael glanced at John, who met his gaze without hesitation. "She is ready," John said firmly. The colonel finally gave a curt nod. "Very well." The target lay on a distant ridge, so far that through Emma's spotting scope it appeared no larger than a coin. She set up her rifle, adjusting the bipod, aligning herself with deliberate calm. The bullet would be in flight for over 6 seconds, passing through layers of shifting atmosphere. She considered wind at multiple altitudes, thermal currents, even the Earth's rotation. Her first shot missed wide. Her second struck closer, the dust rising only yards from steel. By her 5th attempt, The target rang with a faint metallic chime that echoed across the valley. Michael's jaw tightened. By her seventh, she was striking consistently, each impact painting the steel with new scars. The colonel lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression shifting from doubt to astonishment. He had evaluated the world's best marksmen over decades, and yet what he saw now unsettled him. Emma was not just good. She was rewriting the limits of what was possible. When she finally stood, stretching stiff muscles, Michael beckoned him into his office. The room was more war room than workspace, its walls lined with maps, charts, and decades of ballistic data. Emma sat across from his desk, still buzzing with the thrill of the impossible shots she had just made. "I made some calls last night," Michael began, settling into his chair. "There are people who will want to know about this. But first I have a proposition." John shifted uneasily. "What kind of proposition?" he asked. Michael slid a thick folder across the desk. "In 6 weeks, the International Long Range Shooting Association is hosting an event in Nevada. They're calling it the Extreme Distance Challenge. One target, 3,800 meters. 3 shots maximum under official conditions. If you miss all 3, you are barred from sanctioned competition for life. If you succeed, you set a new world record." The words settled like weight on Emma's chest. An official record attempt. Michael's gaze was steady. "I'm not talking about competition. I am talking about history. The current record stands at 3,871 meters. You could push it farther." Emma stared at the photographs in the folder, images of her recent groupings at distances no one believed possible. "But why me?" she asked. "There are shooters with years of training, decorated veterans, champions with reputations." "Because none of them did what you just did," Michael replied. "At 3,500 yards, you made hits under shifting winds and unstable conditions. In 30 years, I have never seen natural ability like that." John raised a hand, his voice firm. "With respect, 2 months of training is not enough preparation. The pressure alone would crush most people." "Which is exactly why it might work," Michael interrupted. "Most shooters at that level carry years of expectations, reputations to defend, ghosts of past failures. Emma has none of that. She approaches each shot like a problem to be solved. Clean, precise." Emma looked down at the photographs of her targets, her mind already spinning through the additional calculations. 3,800 meters would mean more than 6.5 seconds of flight time. Temperature layers, wind differentials, barometric shifts, compounding errors that grew with distance. It was almost absurd, and yet the thought of it stirred something deep within her. "What would the conditions be?" she asked quietly. "Nevada desert," Michael said. "Minimal humidity, but dramatic temperature shifts between ground and air. A steel plate target, 40 inches square, verified by GPS observers from the association, military, and ballistics experts. Everything official." Emma exhaled slowly. "And if I fail?" "Then you miss," Michael said simply, leaning back in his chair. "But if you do not try, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." She turned to John. "What do you think?" He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed. Finally, he said, "You are capable of things I would not believe if I had not witnessed them, but 6 weeks is not much time. The technical skill, yes, you have mastered that. But the mental side, the pressure, that will be unlike anything you have faced." "Then we train for that too," Emma said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Michael nodded, a thin smile crossing his face. "I can arrange additional range time, access to advanced equipment, even consultation with sports psychologists. But in the end, it will come down to you and the rifle." Emma thought of her father, of the lessons she had inherited but never fully understood until now. She thought of the quiet shop, the safe routine she had built, and the way John had disrupted it with a single challenge. She reached for the pen Michael slid across the desk and signed the contract with a steady hand. As the ink dried, she realized her life had crossed a threshold. In 6 weeks, she would either make history or become a cautionary tale. There was no turning back now. The Nevada desert stretched in every direction like a barren sea, dunes and scrub brush shimmering under the rising sun. Emma had arrived 3 days early to accustom herself to the conditions, but the sheer immensity of the range still unsettled her. The firing line was a strip of concrete at the edge of endless space. Beyond it, 3,800 meters away, a steel plate target stood on a ridge no bigger than a postage stamp against the horizon. On the morning of the attempt, the air was cold and clear. The wind carried steady from the southwest at 8 miles per hour. Humidity was low, the sky an unbroken blue. Conditions were as good as they would ever be. Emma had been awake since 4. Her notes spread across the small desk in her room, calculating wind drift, bullet drop, atmospheric layers. Yet when she stepped onto the line, her mind was silent. The crowd was larger than she had expected. Word of her attempt had spread, drawing military officials, ballistics experts, journalists, and curious shooters. Their presence weighed on her shoulders like lead. She could hear the murmur of their skepticism. A shopkeeper with 4 months of training attempting to surpass legends. It felt absurd. Michael walked toward her with the officials from the association. 3 men with clipboards and sharp eyes who would verify every step. "Miss Roberts," Michael said, "are you ready to begin?" Emma rested her hand on the familiar rifle before her. It was John's .338 Magnum, modified over weeks to fit her precisely. Stock reshaped, trigger tuned, optics calibrated to her preference. The weapon felt like an extension of her own body. "I'm ready," she answered. Her first shot missed. The bullet struck the hillside 20 feet left of the target. A murmur swept the crowd, confirmation of their doubts. Emma felt the sting of their judgment, the whispers about arrogance and impossibility. John bent low beside her, his voice steady. "The thermal currents are stronger than forecast." The bullet drifted in the crosswind halfway downrange. Emma nodded, recalculating instantly. The miss had given her data. She adjusted her scope, factoring in the new wind. Her second shot struck the target frame, inches from the scoring area. The crowd's murmur changed tone, no longer dismissive, but intrigued. She had just proven she could hit steel at 2.4 miles, something most would consider a lifetime achievement. But Emma was not finished. "One shot left," Michael called, his voice echoing across the silent range. Emma closed her eyes. She remembered her father's voice, a fragment of memory that had lingered for years. Sometimes you have to stop thinking and trust your hands. She realized she had been trying to calculate every variable, squeezing precision out of chaos. But perfection required more than mathematics. It required instinct. She opened her eyes and lay prone behind the rifle. Through the scope, the target shimmered in the desert heat, impossibly small, impossibly far. She felt her breath steady, her pulse slow. The rifle's weight pressed firmly into her shoulder, balanced and familiar. The wind touched her face with subtle shifts, carrying whispers of currents she had learned to read like a language. She drew in a breath, released half, and held. The crosshairs hovered steady. The desert fell silent in her mind. No crowd, no pressure, no doubt. Only her, the rifle, the target, and the endless space between. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew. 6.8 seconds of flight time. An eternity stretched into a heartbeat. Emma tracked it through the scope, watching dust devils and heat shimmer, trusting the instincts that had guided her beyond charts and formulas. The impact was unmistakable. A puff of dust, a metallic ring carried across the desert like a church bell. The officials scrambled, radios crackling. Target hit, dead center, confirmed at 3,847 meters. For a moment, silence. Then the crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, the clicking of cameras, voices shouting her name. Emma lay still, stunned, her cheek pressed to the stock, unable to move. She had done it. She had broken the world record, extending the boundary of human precision. Later analysis revealed something remarkable. Her technique was unlike anything the experts had seen. Her breathing rhythm, her trigger squeeze, her reading of the wind, all combined into a hybrid style that defied conventional doctrine. What had begun as instinct had become innovation. Her methods would be studied for years, copied, debated, perhaps even enshrined in training manuals. Within hours her phone buzzed with offers. Defense contractors wanted her expertise. Manufacturers wanted endorsements. Training centers wanted her to teach. But Emma declined most of them. She returned instead to her father's shop, the place where it had all begun. The shop was no longer only a business. She transformed it into a center for learning. The back room became a classroom filled with charts and models, and the field behind it turned into a training range. Students traveled from around the world to learn from the woman who had redefined what was possible. John joined her, not as a mentor now, but as a partner, and together they built a program that blended traditional marksmanship with Emma's intuitive science of ballistics and wind. On the wall above her desk hung the rifle that had made the record shot, polished but never fired again. It served as a reminder that extraordinary journeys often begin with ordinary moments. A daughter cleaning her father's tools. A stranger walking into a quiet shop with a rifle. A question posed that demanded an impossible answer. Emma often told her students that patience and precision mattered more than strength or bravado. That the secret to the impossible lay not in fighting variables, but in listening to them. Chaos was never random. She taught it was only complex, waiting for the patient mind to untangle it. And when her students doubted themselves, she would glance at the rifle on the wall and smile. Because she knew that sometimes history is made not by those who seek it, but by those who dare to try.